This is a public meeting. It's a bit loud, isn't it? And it's being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. It is on, isn't it? Yes, thank you. Right, could I therefore ask members to declare any interests, please? No, none to declare. Apologies for absence.
There's no apologies for absence, Chairman.
Thank you. Can I refer everybody to the minutes of the Cabinet meeting that were held on the 5th of September 2023, and they are on page 7. Yes, everybody had the opportunity to read those. Does anybody have any comments or corrections? Anybody have any matters arising from that? No? Thank you very much. We take that as read then. Public speaking. Do we have any members of the public who would like to say a word?
There's no public speaking, Chairman.
Thank you. In that case, if I move on to Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Councillor Starling, that's you.
Thank you. There was a large degree of unanimity in supporting almost everything that was coming before. I will reserve the right just to mention one brief thing on the reserved matters, which are the exclusion of press and public later on. But the committee welcomed the housing standards enforcement policy review, which almost seems long overdue because of the elements, particularly around damp, which never been not addressed or not even considered to be a concern by national health and safety bodies, not considered to be dangerous enough for us to consider to be dangerous, and now we can because it's within our policy. So that was welcomed. There were concerns raised about in the initial report, which I know there's more to be on, but just say there were some concerns raised about the medium-term financial position and reserves update. But other than that, I'll reserve the opportunity to speak later on just briefly on one slight amendment that was put forward and accepted.
Lovely, thank you very much. Is anybody else from non-Cabinet members would like to make any representations on tonight? Well, in that case, we'll move on to the medium-term financial position and reserves update, which you will find on page 13. I would ask Rodney if he'd like to give us an update from those papers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. As you're aware, we're very much at the start of the 24-25 budget setting process. So obviously it's a good opportune time to have a look and see what our medium-term financial position looks like and what our level of reserves looks like as a council. So that's what this paper seeks to achieve. So starting first with the medium-term financial position, that's very much a graph at paragraph 1.2. In common with lots of other authorities, we're seeing an increasing need to spend, representing by the blue line, seeing inflationary pressures, growth in the district, seeing our need to spend increasing, and that is tending to go up further and quicker than our ability to fund that, our ability to fund through council tax and charges and government grants. So very much this puts a picture that we need to continue to look for efficiency savings, ways to generate additional income, and very much to make sure that we continue to be as efficient and more efficient year on year. So I think it's a position that we need to be aware of when we're setting next year's budget. Also worthwhile saying the usable reserves, which is the next element of this report. The starting position of this is the council has £23 million of usable reserves as at the 31st of March 23. So again, we're in a healthy position at the start of this process. However, this does come with a caveat in that the current approved capital programme does draw on a significant proportion of these usable reserves. And indeed, we're suggesting that actually Cabinet over the next few months will need to review the current programme, particularly the capital programme, to make sure that actually our spending plans don't use up all the reserves, indeed too many reserves. So very much there is a very real need for members to get involved in that process and very much sort out our priorities to make sure our capital programme that you'll ultimately approve in February is affordable. The other element in this report is section 3, which is very much for your information, and these are the new off-log metrics that have been reported nationally. So you'll see from the table in 3.3 that generally the metrics for this council are in line with or better than other local authorities. So again, it shows that we are in a good starting position. Should just point out that this is a date for 21-22, but I don't expect the figures to change significantly for 22-23. But as I say, this is very much a position paper at the start of the budget setting process, and it's very much there for members to note and endorse the current position, to very much inform yourselves when we start working on the 24-25 budget over the next few weeks and months. And that's all I was going to say. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's quite an interesting set of figures in there, isn't it? I was quite interested in the off-log things. I do have some questions actually, but I will ask Councillor Riley if he'd like to say something before we go on to any further discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As Rodney's already indicated, the medium-term financial plan in regards to revenue budget, what you're seeing here is very much a snapshot at the moment, and of course, as that's being reviewed now and over the next several weeks, that will of course change. This is very much a snapshot as existed then as this document was being produced, and work is ongoing at the moment with the officers and myself, etc., and will be with Cabinet in terms of the issues around the budget and this deficit, which is including the graph. In terms of the usable reserves and the capital programme, really I would draw the Cabinet's attention to page 16 from 2.4 going down to 2.5 in particular. As you can see from this, taking an excerpt from the February Cabinet report, all reserves are actually allocated here for the capital programme. Therefore, when we've got a deficit forecast here, there's an issue with drawing on those reserves to be able to cover that while we are getting the budgets into equilibrium, so to speak. That is clearly a major concern. So therefore, you will see in 2.5 as the balance in general reserves March 23rd, 5.576, we're clearly stating it will not be possible to continue with the February plan, and therefore we will be reviewing those capital programmes to have an effect in terms of general reserve and to ensure that we do keep a minimum balance as recommended by the government of 1.4 million, which is about 10% of our revenue budget, 14.4. So this is really important, and I'm just drawing the Cabinet's attention to that and what's written under 2.4, 2.5, 2.6, Chair. Thank you.
Anybody else have any comments they'd like to make on the medium-term financial plan?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the officers and the portfolio holder for the statements, and I would just like to re-emphasise what you said as Chair, that these figures are interesting. I think that is a total understatement of the position the council find themselves in, and it is as laid out in the paragraphs, and I think interesting is just a total understatement. Thank you, Chair.
I think if I follow on from Councillor Beadle, I think it shows that there is a lot of work to do between now and our budget setting council in February. It's kind of stating rhetorical in some respects, in that this is a snapshot of the MTFP. It's not in-year monitoring report, in that in terms of the deteriorating position which this report shows, doesn't actually reflect anything that the administration is doing as such at the moment. It purely updates the inflation position from that which was reported in February to a current realistic level, and that reflects the £336,000 increase in the gap. Just I wanted to start a question about the capital programme, and that is just in terms of the projected draw on general reserves. Is there any material changes being made since this budget was passed in February? Any additional drawing from the general reserves or is this exactly as was profiled when we passed the budget back in February?
There have been some additions to the capital programme since February, most notably the purchase of the local authority housing fund properties, but they were going to be funded from the Broadland Growth Reserve, so there may be a few minor changes, but in general, the draw on the general fund reserve is still in line with what was reported in February.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that because, as you say, that is coming from an earmarked reserve, isn't it, from the Broadland Growth Reserve? But as far as the general reserve, the draw on that is as was passed in February, so nothing has been added additional to that. Just to understand that point.
Correct. I think there will be some slippage in the capital programme, which may mean actually the draw, in actual fact, will be less than what was predicted. But you're right, there have been no significant additional schemes added in.
So I think what you're getting at is that we have made no changes to that. We are just following through on the budget as it was, aside from the purchase of those properties, which of course we got a significant sum from the government for. So that was a very useful project. I was interested in the off-log financial metrics. My question really was about under 3.3 on page 19, Rodney. I'm sure you can answer this. The non-ring-fenced reserves, is that the 5.5 million we're talking about in there?
Yes.
That was nice and easy, wasn't it? Thank you very much. That's all I want to know. Any more comments? No? Are we all happy to accept those recommendations? We endorse the latest version of that medium-term financial plan? Yeah? Lovely. So that takes us on nicely to item 8, which is the Housing Standards Enforcement Policy Review, which I think Kevin is going to present, and it's had some good write-ups so far, Kevin, so we're looking forward to it.
Thank you, Chair. The Housing Standard Teams of Broadland District Council enforces a range, and it is quite a big range of legislation to assist tenants in their property regarding issues such as carbon monoxide and defects in the property. Our main tool is the HHSRS, which is 29 hazards, which is detailed in the Housing Act. In November 2021, we put an enforcement paper together to bring all of these into one enforcement document, which required a review. And as a result of that review, you have the paper in front of you. I have to say, when we originated the process with the team, I thought it was a pretty good policy. But on discussion with everybody, it did seem that tweaks were useful to actually improve our accountability in the legislation that we enforce. And we're learning all the time. We're doing new things in new ways. So as a result of that, you'll see in the current issues on point 3 of what we actually find as a result of the review, and in the proposed action, how we're going to address those points, which leads you to your recommendations. And in the recommendations, we've got a new procedure to incorporate to add to our statement of principles, which is part of our smoke legislation, to have a decision process that is accountable. For a charging procedure for notices, up until now, we haven't been ultra vires, but the notice decision on whether we actually charge for a notice, which is a power we have, has been largely up to me. And it related to the cooperation of the landlord. Well, now we've documented this in an actual procedure where we will and will not charge. So should we be appealed on that charge, we have the policy behind us to say we just follow due policy. We're introducing to our civil penalty procedure, because we're learning with civil penalties as we move along as well, that if we actually offer a discount for earlier payment, that actually could be financial benefit to the authority, because it may significantly reduce the risk of appeal, and the appeal with the legal implications that involves can be very expensive. So we've sort of looked at good practice and at other authorities, and we've suggested a 30% reduction for early payment for a civil penalty procedure, which is something we have used in the past at Broadland, and we expect to use it again, possibly relatively soon. As legislation changes all the time, and we were expecting new legislation relatively soon, or that seems to be put on hold by the government, we are expecting a similar civil penalty procedure which uses culpability and harm at existing fine levels in adjacent acts that come along, rather than actually bringing them to your attention and asking for approval individually every time. We've got a holistic decision there that allows us to actually incorporate that decision process into any oncoming acts. And finally, as a result of the issues around damp, when it's assessed using government guidance comes out at a lower level than other hazards. And in our policy at present, those lower level hazards are addressed collectively. So we've adjusted the policy. So if we get a damp hazard in the property up from E or above, we can actually deal with that individually rather than having a collective response to the enforcement that we would for the remaining hazards. I sort of hope that's clear. Any questions?
Lovely, thank you very much. I was very shocked to see how much legislation you've got to trawl through to get to this point, frankly, when I saw the list. It was rather a lot, wasn't there? Does anybody else, I have a question myself, but does anybody else have a question? Yes, Jan.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kevin. On section 3, you talk about operating a reactive service, and then moving to, in 3.5, during this period, the team has also initiated a proactive approach through external funding. Can you just remind me or clarify the external funding you're talking about there?
Yes, well, the external funding for that particular procedure is completed now, but we did get £72,000 across the two authorities to initiate a proactive MEES, that's minimum energy efficiency requirement, for those rental properties that were rated F or G. So whether that's worse than E or higher than an E, it was for an F and G property. So we actually proactively contacted all those residential tenanted properties that were F or G and reminded them of their responsibilities. We sent compliance notice, and we used it was just the threat of civil penalties. We would have used it, but everybody cooperated. So we either got people to actually boost their property to an E or a D or a C, or they initiated the exemption procedure because they spent if you spend £3,500 on insulation, then you're exempt. If you're listed properties, there's exemptions. So they either went through the exemption part in which they were compliant with the legislation, or they actually spent the money and did the works on their property. So it was proactive, and it was relatively successful, and it was externally funded.
Just follow up on that then. I suppose it's around being able to enforce and follow up and having the resources to be able to implement these measures that you're talking about. How are we positioned to be able to follow through on the enforcement policy?
All of the actual requirements of the enforcement policy are adequately resourced within the team. We can actually take action on any of those articles of legislation in that policy. So we are resourced adequately to actually deal with that.
Anybody else? No? In that case, can I just... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, didn't have any questions. I just wanted to comment. Thank you very much for your team, all the hard work. Loads of work has gone into it. I know it's been very well received at ONS, and I think everybody wants to see rogue landlords tackled and better standard of living for everybody. So thank you for all your work.
If I could, I forgot to mention, which is relatively important, the amendment, which is the rogue landlord amendment. And that was you reminded me of that. So we have an amendment which is as a result of a procedure that we're going through at the moment. And if we could get your support for that amendment, That would be really useful in dealing with the rogue landlord situation. It's a decision process, again, using culpability and harm for banning orders and rogue landlords, which are really aligned to each other in the legislation.
So are you saying that's not in
You should have an amendment in front of you.
Oh,
Supplementary paper, sorry, wrong terminology.
yes, fine, I get that, thank you. There was my question actually was just about, you mentioned something that was ultra vires, and then you talked about if you were challenged on something. Are you saying that we are implementing something at the sort of vanguard of when these things are coming through then, or has it been done elsewhere, or how is that working?
Well, on the notice procedure, the Act is quite clear that you have the power to actually charge for officers' time in producing the notice. It goes back on a bit of history, and it used to be called a deferred action notice. So deferred action notice was actually a notice saying if you don't actually do the work, you'll get a notice and you'll get charged. So the deferred action notice was disposed of in deregulation. But when the 2004 Act came out, it was quite clear that you had the power to actually charge for a notice, which effectively you were back to a deferred action notice. The way you actually deal with it is actually say to the landlord, if you don't come up with works or proposed works, we will serve a notice of you and you will be charged. And it's not cheap, it's a few £100. The way we decide on whether a landlord is being cooperated is totally within line with that, but it's based on my decisions. I'd have to defend my position. So what we've actually got is now a set procedure where we require the landlord to actually produce a document of proposed works, and if he doesn't, then he will get a notice and be charged, and if he does and we accept them, then he will avoid the notice. So it's a set procedure, and we can actually say should we be appealed against that decision and the level of the charge.
Okay, so basically it reduced the risk for us of actually being challenged and not being correct. Yes, brilliant. Okay, that sounds fantastic. Thank you very much. Are we all happy with that? Has anybody else got any questions? No? Are we all happy to accept the recommendations? Do you want me to read them out, or are we happy? Did you want to say something? No? Yeah, sorry, it was a hand up, was it? Okay, so we're all happy to accept that and the supplementary amendment, which I think I've got on the bottom page here. Are we all happy with those comments and yes, thank you. Good. Yes, you confused me now. Thank you very much. Thank you. I still am really impressed by the amount of legislation you've got there. Good. Okay then, so item 9 is just for noting the forward plan. Do we have any comments on that? I know some things have moved around and obviously they will continue to do so quite likely. Anybody got any comments they want to make? No? Okay, well we will note the forward plan then, thank you very much. In which case, that brings us on to item 10, where I will exclude the press and public. I move that the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the remaining items of business because otherwise information which is exempt information by virtue of paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended by the Local Government Access to Information Variation Order 2006